The rain hammered down in sheets so thick they turned the highway into a tunnel of gray, and Mark Donovan gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary as his wipers struggled to keep up. Each swipe cleared the glass for barely a heartbeat before the world dissolved again into streaks of water and reflected headlights. His shoulders ached with the familiar bone-deep exhaustion that came from long days, longer nights, and the quiet weight of responsibility that never truly left him. He had just picked up his daughter Emma from school, her backpack damp from the dash through the rain, and dropped her off at his mother's house for the evening. At 38, Mark felt older than he should. The lines around his eyes were deeper now, carved there by years of worry and resilience since his wife had walked out 3 years earlier, leaving him to learn how to be both father and mother to an 8-year-old girl who deserved far more than the broken version of a family she'd been handed. The road curved gently ahead, slick and shining, when he noticed the flashing hazard lights on the shoulder. A police cruiser sat there, hood raised like a wounded animal, rain pouring relentlessly onto the exposed engine. Beside it stood a lone figure, a female officer, her posture tense as she leaned forward to peer inside. Her uniform was soaked through, darkened by water, hair plastered to her head. Cars sped past, their drivers eager to get home, unwilling to stop in weather like this. Mark slowed without quite deciding to. He knew the unspoken rules. It wasn't his responsibility. It was dangerous to pull over. Someone else would handle it. But he also knew himself. He'd never been good at driving past people who needed help. He eased his truck onto the shoulder about 20 feet behind the cruiser and cut the engine. The rain immediately sounded louder, drumming on the roof as he grabbed his umbrella and stepped out. As he approached, boots splashing in shallow puddles, he raised his voice over the storm. "Need some help, officer?" The woman straightened and turned, and in that instant the world seemed to narrow and sharpen, every sound dulling except the pounding of Mark's heart. The umbrella slipped in his hand as he stared at the face looking back at him, rainwater tracing lines down familiar features he hadn't seen in nearly a decade. "Sarah," he breathed, the name escaping before he could stop it. Her professional mask cracked for a split second. Her eyes widened, disbelief flickering there before recognition settled in. "Mark Donovan," she said, voice almost lost in the rain. "Is that really you?" Sarah Collins, his college sweetheart, his fiancée, the woman who had walked away weeks before their wedding, leaving behind a ring, a letter full of apologies, and a wound that had taken years to scar over. Seeing her now felt surreal, like a memory stepping out of the past and into the present without warning. "What are you doing here?" he asked, instinctively moving closer, angling the umbrella so it shielded them both from the worst of the rain. "Last I heard you were in California." She laughed softly, a sound threaded with irony. "I moved back about 2 years ago, joined the force after the academy." She gestured toward the cruiser with a rueful shrug. "And now I'm stuck in what feels like a monsoon with a dead battery." Mark's construction-honed instincts kicked in as he assessed the situation. The rain, the open hood, the stillness of the engine. "Let me take a look," he said. "I've got jumper cables in my truck." As he worked, rain soaking his sleeves, they talked in brief, careful exchanges, like people feeling their way across thin ice. Sarah told him about California, about chasing a modeling career that never quite materialized, about the disappointment that had eventually driven her to look for something steadier, something that felt like purpose. Mark told her about Rebecca, about marrying someone he thought he loved, about Emma's birth and the joy she brought into his life, and about the divorce that had left him alone again, this time with a child depending on him. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly when he finished, "that things didn't work out." "It was for the best," Mark replied, clipping the final cable into place. "Emma is the best thing that ever happened to me." The engine turned over with a satisfying roar, and Sarah's face lit up with relief. "You always were good with your hands," she said, then flushed slightly as she realized how it sounded. Mark smiled, feeling a swirl of emotions he couldn't quite untangle. "Just glad I could help." What should have been the end of it stretched into a few more minutes, then an exchange of phone numbers. "For emergencies," Sarah said, smiling in a way that suggested they both knew better. 3 days later, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table helping Emma with her homework when his phone rang. Sarah's name glowed on the screen, and his heart did an unexpected little leap. "Officer Collins," he answered lightly. "Is this an emergency?" Her laugh came through the line, warm and familiar. "Actually, it's more of a thank you. I was wondering if you might want to grab coffee sometime. My treat, for saving me from drowning in that storm." Mark hesitated. Dating hadn't been on his radar since the divorce, and the thought of reopening old wounds scared him more than he cared to admit. "It's just coffee," Sarah added gently. "No pressure. I'd like to catch up." Something in her tone, patient, understanding, made him agree. They met that Saturday at a small downtown cafe. The first few minutes were awkward, words circling old regrets and unspoken questions. But as time passed, tension eased. They laughed over shared memories, talked about the people they'd become, the mistakes they'd made. "I've thought about you over the years," Sarah admitted at one point. "Wondered if I made the biggest mistake of my life. At the time, it felt like the end of the world," Mark said thoughtfully. "But maybe we both needed to grow." "And now?" she asked softly. "Now I'm a dad first," he replied. "Everything else comes second." "I'd like to meet her," Sarah said. "Your daughter." Coffee turned into dinner the next weekend, then a movie, then a hiking trip where Mark found himself sharing stories about Emma and the small, profound moments that defined fatherhood. Sarah started dropping by his construction site, sometimes in uniform, bringing coffee and staying just long enough to brighten his day. Still, late at night, doubts crept in, memories of heartbreak, fears of history repeating itself. Would it be fair to Emma to let someone else into their lives? The question came to a head one evening when Sarah joined them for dinner. Emma took to her instantly, fascinated by her stories, delighted by her attention. After Emma went to bed, Mark and Sarah sat on the porch swing under a canopy of stars. "I should tell you something," Sarah said quietly. "I've never stopped regretting what I did to you." "I can't go back to who I was," Mark replied after a long pause. "But maybe we can see who we are now." They took things slowly after that, building something careful and real. Sarah became part of their routine, helping with homework, attending school plays, finding her own place in Emma's life without trying to replace her mother. Rebecca, however, wasn't pleased. She reappeared with sudden interest, subtle jabs, inconvenient emergencies. The tension peaked at Emma's birthday party when Rebecca showed up uninvited, gifts in hand. When Sarah offered to leave, Emma grabbed her hand. "Don't go," she said simply. "I want you here." That night, Mark asked Sarah if she was truly in it for the long haul. "I'm not going anywhere," she told him. "Not this time." 6 months after the storm that reunited them, Mark brought Sarah back to the roadside, wildflowers in hand, and asked her to marry him. She said yes through tears and laughter, cars honking as they passed. Their engagement brought challenges, including a bitter custody dispute instigated by Rebecca. Through it all, Sarah stayed steady, never speaking ill of anyone in front of Emma. The judge ruled in their favor, and counseling slowly eased the tension. They married the following spring in Mark's backyard, Emma proudly scattering flowers ahead of Sarah. The first years weren't easy. Careers pulled them in different directions. Fights flared, old fears resurfaced. But they learned to talk, to listen, to forgive. When they decided to try for a baby, the road was harder than expected. Months of disappointment gave way to a surprise pregnancy when they'd stopped trying so hard. Their son, James, arrived on a clear spring morning, Emma watching in awe. 5 years after the rain-soaked reunion, their life had settled into something steady and full. One evening, as they watched Emma teach James to catch fireflies, Sarah leaned into Mark. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if you'd just driven past me that day?" she asked. Mark kissed her hair, eyes on the family they'd built. "I couldn't have driven past," he said softly. "Some things are worth stopping for."